So, hi everybody, welcome back to Anthropology 340 Native Cultures of North America. Today we're going to be talking about the Maya today, what's going on with them, and we'll look at Mayan hieroglyphs. We'll also look at the Guatemalan Civil War. So lots of stuff to go over today. We're also going to be looking at the Indigenous Groups research paper and presentation, along with the essay rubric, which was up in last week's folder. So hopefully you took a look at that today. Let's take a look at this. We will, today we're going to be talking about your paper and presentation. So for this class, you're going to be writing a 7 to 10 page paper about Indigenous society in North America. If you're in the 333 class, it's a similar assignment, but this is a group inside of North America, and that class is a group outside of North America, so you can't do the same ones. So we'll all be doing different groups, and that way we don't have to hear 10 projects about the Cherokee or the Apache or something like that. We'll get some diversity in the topics that we hear about. So it's 7-10 page paper, and then you're going to do a 5 to 7 minute talk in here with PowerPoint like I do a little bit later in the semester. So you're going to be researching a group, and it's very similar. The things you're going to be researching are very similar to what you do when you do those culture area homeworks every week. You'll be looking at the environment, which is like the physical environment. Where is the tribe located? What groups are nearby? Material culture, housing, clothing, food, tools, weapons, art, both modern and in the past. Customs, notable members, the land, the landscape. Where do they live? Where do they live now? Do they have a reservation? Did they get moved to somewhere else? And struggles and successes. So we'll be looking at that. You write a 7 to 10 page paper, not including bibliographic sources. And when you do your essay, we're using this rubric, which you find online, so you know how you're going to be graded, right? With critical, with your knowledge, with your analytic thinking and content development, your intercultural understanding, and your verbal communication skills. It's like complete sentences and things like that. So that's already up there. That will be used for an assessment thing. That's why we have to use this rubric. And then afterwards, you're going to give a 5 to 7 minute PowerPoint presentation, which will have each of those topics: environment, material, customs, all that stuff, as different slides. You need pictures on each one, and you'll get it. Yeah. And I also put, if you're completely lost and don't know what group you want to do, these are some of like classic Native American groups that you're just going to find tons and tons of information on. So if you're like, oh, I don't know any, right? Any of these would be fine. You're not going to have any problem finding stuff on the Hopi or the Navajo or the Iroquois. Plenty of sources. So at the end of class today, I have this attendance sheet. So those of you who are here will get first dibs. You can come up here and I'll try to save a few minutes at the end of class, and you can tell me a group, and I'll write it down. Yeah.
So I have two questions. You included the discussion of on Canvas.
That's good.
And you had us respond to.
Oh, good.
Choosing the groups.
Okay, then I'll create a list of that, and I'll get back if I have any duplicates, and then we'll fix it that way. Cool.
So that sheet is just to confirm.
I'll get Jose to print me off a updated list, and then we'll talk about it on Friday, I guess.
Okay.
Cool.
And then my second question
Thanks.
For the format of the research paper. Would you like this in APA?
Whatever you like. APA, MLA, ASA, American Antiquities, right? As long as it's consistent, I don't care, right? Some of you are anthropology majors, and if you are, we can discuss that further, but for most of you, it's a Gen Ed class, so use whatever you're most comfortable with, right? Cool. So let me get the list of groups from Jose, and then I will double check to make sure there's no duplicates, and if there are, I'll contact you personally about that. Cool. Okay, the other thing we are going to do this week, and let's go. Where is this? Where's the There you go. Okay, so we talked about the Maya last time, especially the ancient Maya. Somebody give me a couple highlights. What were some things that you learned? You learn anything? Yeah, the ancient calendars, 2012. That's cool stuff. Anything else that you liked?
I really like how, prestigious or like how wide known they are for, their knowledge consisting of astronomy.
Yeah.
That's like.
The calendar, like people are really drawn to that, the calendar, the astronomy. And the other thing that probably Mayan ancient Maya people are known for, at least beyond the sacrifice and the warfare and stuff like that and astronomy is probably the hieroglyphs. And we're going to be looking at hieroglyphs. I wanted to do this last time because we were doing ancient, but I think it's just too cool to leave out. So I gave you a piece of paper. Did everybody get one? We'll do it pretty quick. These are the Maya syllabary. One really interesting thing about Maya is that it was difficult for people to decipher the first time because it is a complex language system that is both logographic and syllabic. Logographic meaning sometimes a hieroglyph stands for a whole word, and oftentimes it's pretty easy to tell. A jaguar face, something like Malam. Right? Something like this. It's a jaguar. It's the face of a jaguar. That's easy, right? But sometimes they will spell it out. Balama. Balam, right? This is very confusing for, archaeologists for a long time and epigraphers, because how do you do this? But what they started to do is to look for people whose names were one thing or the other, and then you can look for the same name appearing more than one time. And people being like, well, it's kind of interesting. It's spelled different ways. And it helped us unlock the Maya syllabary, right? And this is something that wasn't really deciphered until like the mid 20th century. So in the last, 50 years, 75 years, we've really had a big advancement in Maya epigraphy. And I'm super interested in it. I took a Mayan hieroglyphs glyphs class in grad school and Maya language in PhD school. And I wish I was better at hieroglyphs, but I think it's super interesting. And I wanted to kind of share it with you just briefly. Maybe write some of your names in Maya or some words, right? So I'm gonna show you this video and then we'll do a little bit of Mayan hieroglyphs. Okay, so we are back. We did a little hieroglyphs. We're going to jump over to modern Maya populations for the rest of the go away. There we go. Before we do, when we talk about the modern Maya, we're going to have we're going to have a guest speaker in class on, my announcement showing up. We're going to have a guest speaker on Friday to talk about the modern Maya. Dr. Christina Bain, she is a ethnographer of modern Maya. She's going to be talking to us about her research in Belize. And also on Thursday night in this room at 7 o'clock right here, there's an extra credit opportunity. She'll be giving a guest lecture, and we encourage you all to come out and attend. There'll be an extra credit attendance sheets at the front for you to sign. You can get those extra credit points. So come on out and hear Dr. Baines. Okay, this will give you a little bit of background. It will be kind of quick because she's going to talk more at length on Friday. But this will give you kind of some, some context for modern Maya populations, right? One of the things about the Maya, and I write this in my dissertation in my book, right? One of the most common misconceptions is that they're all extinct, right? People know about pyramids, they know about astronomy, they know about Chichen Itza and stuff, and then you're like, oh yeah, me and my students went to do field work with, in Maya community last Christmas. People were like, what? How did you go back in time, right? You're like, no, these people still live here. There's like 6 million people still living in Central America and increasingly in the United States as well. And hopefully if some of you are interested and want to go to grad school here, we have an ongoing project where students go down to Belize and live in Maya communities. So you're welcome to take part in that someday. We're talking about Mexico, Belize, Guatemala. These are people who still, in many ways, kind of, embody these traditional cultures, native cultures, going back to the classic era, but have also been colonized for 500 years. So you have this interesting mix of traditional indigenous ways of life mixed with Spanish and British, Mexican kind of culture as well. Most Maya people live in, this is kind of a traditional house. This is actually more like a Yucatan looking house. Thatch roof, kind of wattle and daub walls. Um, it's great in the tropics because this is like, if you don't have air conditioning, it's nice to get your breeze in here. People live in these houses for usually 5 or 10 years. And you cook in it, and the smoke kind of from your cooking fire goes up through the roof, and it kind of preserves all this thatch, makes it last a little bit longer, keeps some of the rodents out, but it's still best maybe to have a pet cat because you're going to get lots of rats and mice and roaches up in your roof. So cat helps keep that down. Then after 5 or 7 years, just becomes unsustainable. You burn it down and you start again. When we talk about Maya people today, they still often, especially ones who practice or more on the Catholic side of things versus the Protestant church, which we'll talk about a little bit later with kind of the changing religion in these communities, still practice many of these rituals. These are, this is an example. This is from Chiapas, it looks like, or maybe Highlands, Guatemala, where oftentimes, right, when the Spanish came in the 15th century and conquered the Maya, they outlawed a lot of these traditional practices and beliefs and saints and spirits and deities and magical practices. And so the Maya kind of did this reinterpretation, and they said, yes, we're not doing those things anymore. We are now, we're good Catholics, right? This is a Catholic ritual. But in many ways, there's these kind of connections to the indigenous rituals as well. So like you'll have these kind of rituals to a saint of a particular place, but oftentimes it'll have many of these kind of pre-Columbian kind of motifs going on or sacrifices made along with it. Okay. So, it's kind of a classic inside of a Maya house, often with a cook fire. The traditional is a 3-stone hearth, which mostly women will be cooking soup or tortillas or things like that, which people will use to eat. Let's see. In my communities today, there's still a strong kind of gender division of labor. This is, kind of a classic picture of Highlands, Guatemala. You can still visit today. Many of the women are still wearing these traditional dresses. There's, 29 different Maya languages, and each one's going to have a different traditional dress. And even beyond that, the skirts that they're wearing can identify them as from a certain village even. Men primarily work in the fields. This is milpa agriculture, slash and burn agriculture, in which a plot of land is farmed for 2 or 3 seasons. You cut down all the bush, the trees, you burn it, makes fertilizer often in areas of pretty poor soil. You plant and then you let it go for 7 to 50 years, depending on whatever town you're in or how many people live there or how impacted you are. And then the trees grow back and you're able to farm it again at a later date. And it helps preserve kind of the environment, but it's a really low density kind of activity, right? You're not staying in one place at a particular time. You're kind of always moving to a new farm. Women mostly work at home, caring for children, often doing markety kind of things, producing cloth, tapestries, or making dresses, or cooking and processing food and making that and selling that food in the market as well. Let's see. Oh, we're running out of time. I want to, slash and burn. There's lots of pictures. One of the other things that people do besides slash and burn is what we call intensive forestry or arboriculture, or maybe forest gardening, it's often been called. And this is what I spent a lot of time in my PhD research looking at, especially cacao production. Anybody know what you make out of cacao? There's some cacao out there. Chocolate, yeah, it's chocolate production. So this is really interesting because it forms this kind of complement. Part of your time is spent doing corn, beans, and squash, these kind of short-term crops. And this is kind of a long-term crop. This tree can produce for anywhere between, starting at year 5 up to like year 25 or even 50 years after you plant it. And this is actually interesting to me because it's the largest cash crop now in the country of Belize. And 50 years ago, there was no cash crop at all. It was considered a sacred instrument used in rituals and social events. So how did it go from being a social ritual crop to the largest commercial crop in Belize? And the answer is, religious change and economic development. And if you're interested, I have a whole book on it. Other times people kind of do these, work on plantations, often, especially in the highlands, working kind of as wage workers at plantations in highlands of Guatemala, or increasingly in the United States. There's a large, where I'm from in Florida, there's a large Maya population of people who work as kind of itinerant agricultural workers, right? Picking strawberries or picking tomatoes and kind of moving around to these different agricultural areas depending on the season. And land is a tricky issue, right? Especially in colonialism in Guatemala, especially the Maya areas are, most of the good farmland was taken by either Spanish colonists or later sold to the United Fruit Company, banana company out of the United States, which owned large portions of Guatemala. And even today, post-Civil War, we'll take a look at the Civil War in just a moment. Only like 2% of the population in Guatemala owns like 70% of the land. And do you think that 2% of the population is indigenous Maya? No, a lot of them have like very German last names, right? They're German expatriates who came over in the 1920s and 30s and 40s and purchased large plots of land. And so a lot of the people who, even though it's their traditional land or they're indigenous to this area, are often forced to work on, outsiders' plantations, whether it's sugarcane, coffee, cotton, or other, export crops, which are not really super useful for feeding your family. So when you do this, you have to often spend weeks or months away from your family. This is northern Belize, people cutting sugarcane. Again, it's kind of like these large farms in which people have to work for wages. One of the really interesting things about working in southern Belize, though, is that they've set up a Maya homeland. They've won court cases, so they're able to have land for themselves, and outsiders aren't allowed to purchase land within this district or within this area. And so it kind of creates a space for people to do their own farming, have their own land, and not be kind of these wage workers. I'm going to jump ahead because I only have 15 minutes. Let's go up here for religion. There's too many slides. Just like we talked about earlier, oftentimes there's these shrines, and you'll find them as you go and walk through the forest or going through people's farms. People will make shrines, especially to deities or spirits that inhabit a certain place, right? Before you plant corn, often you'll make kill a chicken and put the blood and some chocolate on a little table altar. You'll light some candles, you'll say some prayers, because as a farmer, nothing is worse than bad weather or no rain. And you'll take all the help that you can get to make sure that you can feed your family. And when the Spanish came, like I said, many of the ancient gods were suppressed, and so they were re-emerged as Catholic saints. And you can actually see this. It's really wild. One of my favorite examples of this is a guy named Maximo. If you ever get to go to, also known as San Simon, he is kind of a deity in the highlands of Guatemala. It's a really interesting syncretic religion that's up there, right? They worship this guy. You'll go into these towns and there'll be houses in which these shrines are kept, and you can go and pay homage to him. You can give the person some money, maybe some cigarettes or some rum for the statue, and say some prayers. It's a really interesting, what we call syncretic religion, right? It mixes ancient Maya stuff like the Mam, which is the spirit of the mountains, I think is probably the best way to describe it, thundery mountain kind of person, along with Saint Peter, Judas Iscariot, and Pedro de Alvarado, who is one of the conquistadors of Guatemala. So he's kind of this bad dude, and people worship him, both kind of out of, fear, but also for, he's like a trickster, kind of light and dark deity. But a really interesting example of how, all these very different figures can come together into, these syncretic religions.
If your religious saint doesn't have like a pair of sunglasses or a bandana, it's not.
The coolest thing is you can put actually there's that they have an open mouth and there's like a little bellows inside, so you can actually put cigarettes in his mouth and then you can like puff away at it. You can pour rum in his mouth, One of the things we're kind of out of time. While one of the really interesting but also very sad things about the Maya is that we often think of kind of like the Indian Wars as something that happened a really long time ago, back in the 1800s. But for Maya people, you know, the bad luck just kind of keeps coming, whether it's Spanish colonialism in the 1500s, British colonialism of Belize in 1800s, you know, rebellions of the Caste War in Mexico, in which they established an independent state that was recognized by Great Britain until 1901 and had, you know, cannons and early Gatling guns and stuff like that before being reconquered by the Mexican government. Or the Guatemalan Civil War, which we're going to watch, you know, just a little bit of today before the end of class. It's gonna, you know, in the 1960s all the way through the 1990s. And I went to Maya school in Guatemala, and it was started by ex-guerrillas and ex-comandantes from the Maya Civil War, right? The Maya were on one side fighting kind of the government. It was caught up in all this kind of Cold War ideology of communism versus capitalism, but in many ways it was just kind of the Maya trying to get land, you know, because they had 2%, you know, 2% of the people in Guatemala who are not Maya own the vast majority of the land. And during the Civil War, you know, tens of thousands of Maya people were massacred. 300 Maya villages, which once existed, were wiped off the face of the map and like no longer exist. They bombed them with helicopters and tanks and things like that. And one of the things that, you know, while I was down there, this was kind of just after the Civil War, and it ended in the early 90s, and I was there in the early 2000s. Students and forensic biological anthropologists, archaeologists were working in the country in order to kind of identify mass graves from the Civil War, identify who these people were, often in conjunction with like family members who are like, oh yeah, they massacred those people up on the ridge and buried them in the cornfield. And then identifying, you know, what kind of weapons were used, right? Was it Israeli ammunition and US ammunition, or was it Cuban and Russian ammunition? You can kind of see whose sides they were, right? Trying to identify who were the victims and who were the perpetrators, and try to bring perpetrators of these crimes to justice while they were still alive and while the family members were still alive, right? Especially as they were getting older. So we'll watch a little bit. And if any of you are interested in kind of this side of biological forensic anthropology, right? This is kind of ongoing, not only in Guatemala, but in places around the world. It's a very needed profession, and I encourage you to look into it if that's your thing. So let's take a look a little bit at the secret genocide funded by the United States in Guatemala.